we don't need to agree. We just need to converge. I think the idea of freedom within constraints is so important to success. And
Yes.
so let's embrace these constraints and use them as the basis of our strategy. How can I show off that I have outsized impact with limited resources? It's possible through good flexible strategy and good organization design.
Welcome to Strategy Meets Reality podcast. I'm your host, Mike Jones, and today I'm joined by Julian Chender, organisational design expert, strategy advisor, and founder of 11A Collaborative. We explore how purpose-driven organisations can navigate real constraints while staying adaptive, aligned, and impactful. This is a grounded conversation about doing strategy, not just talking about it. Welcome back to Strategy Meets Reality podcast. I'm delighted to be joined by Julian Chender today. Thank you for joining me on the show. It's fabulous to have you on.
Honored to be here. Been a big fan for a long time.
Oh, I know we've me too, and I know we've communicated online, but we never really actually got to sit down and have a conversation. So I'm really excited about this.
Me too.
So for our listeners, do you mind giving a bit of background about yourself and a bit of context of what you've been up to lately?
Sure. So I would say I'm an org designer first and a strategist second, but the two are for me mutually exclusive. And my work is exclusively in the social sector. So that means everything from the CSR work of corporations to direct service charities.
Yes.
So it's a bit of a broad swath, but it's a do-gooder space, and it's a space that I find doesn't have the same repetition with these concepts of strategy and org design that my work in the corporate space did. So I'm doing a lot to translate right now to a new field, but it's a field that's, I think, growing and picking it up and needing to in the wake of a lot of trauma and international aid, and just the nonprofit sector here in the U.S. is threatened every day.
Yes. Yeah, I've seen this a lot with that. And I think that's where strategy really comes into its own. And I'm really picking up that point you saying about strategy in sort of the social sector in those, because for a long time, the orthodoxy around strategy or the thing is all around, at best, probably Roger Martin's thing, where it's all about, where do we win?
Yep.
And it's all about, it's all great if I'm selling Persil, but when you're Persil, I don't know if it's the same in America, but washing detergent, but yeah. But if I'm in a social sector, it's not about necessarily winning.
No, it's
how
about
to be
impact.
viable. Yeah.
It's about
a
impact. It's how do
viability to have
we,
an input.
the viability to have an impact. Yes, I'm sorry to talk over you.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah,
bit
yeah.
of my New Yorker style, but it's not how do we win, it's what impact do we want to have in what area, and how do we be clear about that. And where a lot of this falls down is we want to help everybody do everything because we care, and that's great, and few organizations can accomplish that. In fact, I would say no organization can be everything to everybody. So what is your field of play? Who is your constituency? Who are your beneficiaries? Really doing almost a strategy map of, these people might be in your orbit, but they aren't the people you serve, but you need them to serve the people you want to. If you're doing housing, or if you're doing, right now, food is a really big issue with our food assistance program being withheld with the government shutdown. So there's like, okay, but what's the population we can target? Is it these 4 blocks of New York City, or is it the, East Coast of the United States? What's our field of play becomes a huge question for people. And I feel like that's really is where you can have strong impact in a narrow field of play.
Yeah. And it's like what Clausewitz talks about, which is no organization, regardless of size, has unlimited resources.
Right.
Therefore, strategy is about utilizing those limited resources to your advantage. And that's just the same in the corporate world. I think people get this thing where they try to be everything, but try to be everything means a lot of resource, a lot of thing, and organizations don't have it. So I think being very clear on what you're there to do really helps with that.
Yeah. And I think resources are an interesting concept here, especially in the social sector, because I started my business 11A Collaborative working exclusively in the social sector. I left Accenture in September of last year. So before our presidential election. And
Yeah.
business was good through the end of November. So the presidential election was at the beginning of November, end of November. Christmas hits, holidays hit, everyone goes dark. By January 20th, the sector was frozen, which was
Yes.
inauguration day. Like the
Yeah.
whole sector was frozen. And by March, half of it was dismantled. And by May, everyone was sitting there just going, we have to scenario plan, we have to scenario plan, we have to scenario plan. And I sat here thinking, with the level of uncertainty, chaos even that we have as organizations, what's scenario planning going to get you? Because you might have one scenario, if you do a great scenario plan, like three solid pages of what the scenario is, that's going to hit from 4 to 4:45 on Friday, and by 9 a.m. Monday, it's going to be completely different.
Yeah. I get it. You say right, and I think a lot of these things like scenario planning, and like you said, they are useful, but sometimes people then use it as a problem to be gazed at rather than, well, what decisions do we need to make now? What affordances have we got? What adjacent possibilities? How can we
Yeah.
start to maneuver around this? And I think that's where we've lost the art of strategy. Is gone. We've moved away from that maneuverability. How do we sense what's happening? And I was chatting to on the previous podcast to Elsa Henderson. She was in Social Pact, and she said about Trump and obviously cut the funding, USAID, and all this stuff. And I said, yeah, but this is the art, because you should be looking, sensing, going, well, how would we know if he does that? Then what can we do? Rather than, I suppose, just staring at the problem and then having to react to very limited options.
I love the way you think.
Shit, cheers,
And
thank you.
I would say most of the social sector sat and stared at the problem and saw their options increasingly limit. And that's why we're in a position where funders are pushing mergers, they're pushing dignified closures, people are scraping by with what they have. But I think we missed an opportunity as a sector to be active strategists in the
Yeah.
midst of a chaotic environment. And my uncle, who was, I consider a very wise person, told me when I was trying to figure out my own strategy for a career that I have to put something out into the universe and see what comes back. So when you talk
Yes.
about sensing, I call it pinging. It's
Yeah.
almost like a sonar. It's like you send a ping and then you see what comes back. And all of a sudden, then if it comes back sideways, you know to maneuver a certain way. If it comes back straight, you know to maneuver a different way. And so this is where I see strategy as being constantly adaptive or constantly in motion and really a muscle that an organization uses and governs. And so much of what I see is and this is corporate and social. So is
Yeah.
the inability to govern strategy on an ongoing basis.
Yeah.
That
I,
setting it, everyone feels great about setting it, but to run it like the operation that it is something that I think is lacking across industries. What do you think?
yeah, I completely agree. Is that whole execution? I do challenge sometimes around the setting of it as well, because I think they get locked in on this abstract idea of strategy, which then hinders their ability to sense and adapt from, because they're going, well, what we adapting from? And you see people go, well, we want to be the best, like, charity or thing, or we want the best organization.
A
We
person.
want high performing this, and well, that's not really strategy. That's a nice ambition,
It's
but
an
it's
ambition.
not.
The
Yeah,
strategy is how you get there,
yeah.
right?
We're trying to execute in there. Yeah, is
Yeah.
is is it's really your relationship with the external environment, and trying to get that to your advantage all time, and that's how we constantly maneuver. And this is why the relationship, where you said you were an org design first and strategy second, I find that really interesting, because obviously with strategy, I'll say I'm a strategist, but then I have to get involved in org design because the two are so mutually exclusive and I think this is often missing in the strategy work, is they frame this strategy, and this is probably why they can't move or sense, because they frame the strategy, but they don't realize then the organization will either constrain or make possible the strategy.
Yes. So the way I've worked with that over the last 5-ish years is really thinking about, okay, you have a very concrete strategy. And again, we're taking that with a grain of salt in this conversation, the idea of a concrete strategy, but that's what people like because they can hang their hat on it and sleep at night.
Yeah.
I think what you and I are asking people to do in terms of adaptive strategy or continuous strategy, or even just sensing your environment and responding, responsive strategy, is an uncomfortable place to be as a human being. It brings up feelings of uncertainty, of doubt, of lack of clarity. And I think the human mind, and especially the way we're socialized in the West, is for certainty and measurable progress. And
Yes.
so how are we going to even measure our progress if we're adapting all the time? So I take all of that with a grain of salt, but a lot of the work I've done is to take what is a more or less concrete strategy and say, how are you going to achieve this with what you have, or what do you need to do differently to achieve this? So, for instance, I worked with an organization, a corporate philanthropy, that was constrained financially as we went along and wanting to increase their impact in economic mobility for young people. And so we had two competing priorities, which was cost savings and increased impact. And the way to do that was through the organization itself, because before they had been exposing, young people to career opportunities and doing scholarships and doing career fairs and like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And they had all these classes and they were nationwide, and they had all these things where people could really explore and play and figure out what they wanted to be and how to get there. And they were now focusing on, instead of introductory, we want to the next level. We want actually to see them get jobs and to improve their economic situation. Well, the organization that did all the classes is not the organization that's going to get them jobs and make them more money and help them grow up the economic ladder, because it's a different purpose. It's not even a different strategy. It's a completely different purpose. So that was a process of intertwining org design and strategy development as we went over the course of a year, because that was over the course of, basically pre-Trump inauguration to Trump inauguration to tariffs to all these things. And they're thinking, well, is the company going to give us enough money? What's happening to the foundation dollars? The tax bill from this summer changed what corporations could do with their foundations. Do we even have a foundation anymore? All of that going on while trying to concentrate impact and boost measurably the impact that they're having, because introducing people to career options is wonderful, and they might not get that elsewhere. But that's kind of level one on a hierarchy of progress, where economic mobility is level 3 or 4.
Yeah. And I like that idea. They've got that clear intent what they're going to do, and they can understand then that actually the current organization will not get them to that situation. So then it's about going, okay, so what do we need? And it's always, I always say, then from that's always, you've got the capability, you're just redirecting it in a different way, or you need to create new capability.
Exactly. And I think that's what it is what are the capabilities that got you there won't get you here. Maybe, table stakes capabilities will translate. And a lot of organizations I've worked with are struggling even on table stakes capabilities, like, following directions and all these things, little things that we have to get in order just to be at the starting point. And then what are the capabilities that are going to get you to those outcomes? And if that's to be the best, the best seller of Tide detergent, and for Tide to be number one in across, Europe, then you have this matrix thing where you're doing the general manager of Europe and the head of Tide, and they're figuring out what the next washing machine is going to be and how to make the right formulation of the soap and what is the packaging and all of that. Then you have this whole thing where it's like, well, we have the capability to do all of that because we've done it with 3 different new kinds of washing machines in Europe based
Yeah,
on
yeah, yeah.
some of the legal ramifications of energy efficiency for the last 15, 20 years. So those capabilities can remain the same.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
here, where you're measurably creating a different outcome or product, I mean, these outcomes are considered products or programs, then the capability is fundamentally different. It needs to be either built, bought, or botted, automated, which is now an option.
Yeah. Yeah, 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 true.
The thing is, building capabilities is much more has a lot better longevity than buying.
Yes.
But there are organizations that just can't build because they don't have enough to build on. And so
Yeah.
I've worked with organizations where buying is the best option, hiring a new senior team, or, if we're going in a direction of, there was one organization that shifted direction. It was a bit of there was kind of a confluence of events. Was they ran out of funding because of Trump, but had to respond to their social justice organization. So, Trump says no one can fund social justice anymore. All of a sudden, foundations pull back, corporations pull back, individuals pull back from the funding them. So they have all of a sudden a lack of funding. And now social justice needs, for them, 4 times the fight it needed in 2017 during the first Trump administration.
Yes.
So they had this thing where they had to do a whole capability switch on a reduced resources.
Yes.
So it was, who in our organization can, instead of being specialists on every little issue that we fight on, they had 11 issue areas, and that's how they were. That's how they were organized, by issue area.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
So we had to think about, actually, before we even got to strategy, we had to think about cost savings and orientation to the problem that we want to solve.
Yeah.
We knew the problem to solve. The strategy is now in development after some of the organization design, which is not the way I
Yes.
like to do things, but is the way this needed to happen, because
Yeah.
they couldn't run the budget that they had, and it wasn't getting them the results they needed. So it was kind of both and so
Yes.
now
Yeah.
they've gone from being specialists to generalists, which is because everything that they respond to is interconnected across those 11 issue areas now.
Mm.
The way attacks on civil rights are seen from this organization is interconnected and interdisciplinary in this new world. Whereas before, it was clear, cut and dried, immigration was immigration, and school was school, and voting rights was voting rights. No, now those 3 things are all in one. Because when ICE
Yeah.
shows up in Chicago at schools and at polling places, it's all interconnected.
Yeah.
So they've translated to being generalists, but now we have to build the strategy of what does it mean to be a generalist, which is to be adaptive.
Yeah. 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 That shows you great agility to be able to move resources and quickly adapt capability. And I suppose, again, this is where we look at, it's not clear cut. It's not one feeds the other. It's that, whatever the context is will feed what it needs to feed. So actually, I've been in situations where we need to sort the organization out into a point, which then by doing that, releases options that wouldn't probably have been available in the strategy. And that's why the 2 are so interrelated. But all the time that I see is in organizations, they do it in separate. So we've got this strategy, and then we let's tweak around the organization here. They do them in isolation to each other, to the detriment of each other. Which is really frustrating.
As a consultant, it is.
Yes, yeah.
um, Where do you see those capabilities? Where's your angle when you're working with clients to talk about the capabilities you'll need to realize your ambition?
Well, this is when we're doing say for instance, we're doing strategy first. We're looking at the external environment and we're looking at the different actors and we're assessing our relationship with those. And the question always is that if you do nothing, would you be happy where this takes you?
Mm-hmm.
And if the answer is no, then what do you need to do to change the nature of that relationship? And
Mm-hmm.
and that's where the maneuvers come in. We need to put more, in a sense, strength around this area. Well, what does that mean? Well, it
Mm-hmm.
means that we need to move this. Okay, so, and it's always translating back to the organization. So everything they say they're going to do is they'll go, well, okay, so where and how? Where in the organization can constitute that from? How are you going to do that? And that then gets clients to start recognizing the relationship between the organization, the strategy, and strategy and the organization.
I
And
love that.
then yeah, and then often as well, when we're looking at strategy, we can see a strategy that they want to do or they need to do, but they are not capable. There's just not in a million years at this point in time that there will be it would be too much stretch, and after they try to go for it, they'll probably actually destabilize themselves. So then we go, well, okay, so what do we need to do first then? What can we do?
Right.
As in, we get to that point, and then that'll open up options, and we could do that. But it's always that relationship between the organization change and and how do we balance that?
Yeah, that resonates. Where I run into trouble with that, and because I do similarly, but where I run into trouble is the quick fall down the cliff into tactics
Yes, yeah, yes,
when translating from strategy to organization. It's just, well, we need to do this project or that program of work. And I'm thinking these are tactics. This is,
yes,
maybe 6 weeks down the line. But if you just fall into tactics, you're working then bottom up from a tactic driven, the sum of your tactics equal your strategy, which is
yeah,
not where we want to be. But
no.
it's that link between capabilities. It's that link between strategy and capabilities where I find a lot of people fall off into tactics. And I wonder how you've seen that.
This is where I create great inspiration from von Moltke
One of
and
my
what von Moltke.
favorites.
Yeah, he's an absolute legend. People who listen to this know, or just read any of my stuff. You see, I've mentioned von Moltke, but he talks about this is a shortened quote of his, but he says the higher you are, the shorter your order, and it comes into mission command. So
Hmm.
often when they're going into that, I have to get them back and go, well, no, what's the outcome or the capability shift you want to
Right.
make, not how you're doing it. And I have to try and get them back to the recursive level. So all the time when they're talking about stuff, I said, right, yeah, that's great, but by those activities you're talking about, what is it that you're wanting to achieve?
Right.
And I get them to focus on that, and then we go, right, that's the order you need to go to, and say, so it's not going, oh right, we're going to do this project here, and this here. You're going to say, for instance, the R&D department, say R&D, head of R&D, I need you to change your cycle rate from 12 months to 6 months.
But
That's
you're
like
not
that's
telling the head of R&D exactly how to do that.
no, no, exactly, and that's where it's trying to get him back. And this is where the you comment on one of my posts the other day when I shared my article around must protect the ability to act, and this is what we're talking about, giving people the agency, because when we talk about that adaptive strategy, it's that capacity there that enables us to adapt. What we're doing is not really going to fundamentally change, as you were talking about one of your clients there around, they're going through inauguration and then other issues. The aim to try and get economic mobility was still there. They're
Hmm.
just adapting to those changing circumstances. And it's not and I keep saying to you, it's not the executives. You're not the one adapting. It's the people on the ground are adapting. So you've got to give them the freedom of action. Yeah.
And what I love the mission command approach, and I
Mm.
love this idea of your order is shorter at the top. And
Yeah.
I have from my time working with Amy Cates this model of layers of leadership, There's kind of a strategic layer, which should meet very frequently but do very little, and have a very long time horizon. Then there's the integrative layer, which is knitting the organization together to achieve the strategy. And then there's the operational layer, which is if you're selling soap, you're selling soap. So there's producing the soap or whatever it is. And what I find in all my work is that strategic layer is so far down in the organization that they've lost their strategy.
Yes.
Because they think they're helping.
Yeah, yeah. You see it, they get involved in some crazy stuff. I mean, I sit there in executives and I think, why do you care about that? That's not your battle to have. That's someone else's battle to have.
Is it a trust
now,
thing?
Yeah, well, I always say with leaders about trust, there's normally reasons why you don't trust something. So it's either they haven't got the capability or skills experience. So I suggest you bring in some constraints and then you build up that KSE quickly as possible. They're morally corrupt. So if they're morally corrupt, you don't trust them, then you better do something about it. Or it's you. A lot of the time, especially when you're speaking to people that are really, I suppose, in personality terms, really outcome focused, high and conscientious, they're not exactly naturally trusting of people, and they think that they can do it better themselves. They just do it. Well, then that's you. You need to get over that pretty quickly. Yeah, but you've got to trust. It's fundamental to von Moltke's whole philosophy is around trust.
Yeah. I mean, I think half of what I do is strategy and org design, and half of what I do is really that individual work with leaders. And the time spent is not 50-50, but the energy is 50-50. Because when you're redoing an organization, think top to bottom strategy, even the impact we want to have. So let's go back to the economic mobility. The leader was new and had that new vision, but everyone else was used to everything the way it had been for 6 to 10 years. So there was a quality of her adapting to them and them adapting to her. That's a new leader situation. But then there's the one where you have a leader who's been there for 4 or 5 years with the Trump inauguration and civil rights and social justice needing to switch. And so there's a quality of what is the leader's internal constellation of the organization, their own felt unseen sense that lives within them, that like what organization are they leading is really the question.
Yeah.
Are they leading the new organization or are they leading the old organization? And so a lot of what I do in organization design and strategy work is that individual work with the leaders or the leadership team, often because they're the ones who will be governing the strategy going forward. And this is where I find everything falls apart, which is we can have the design, we can have the strategy, we can even have the adaptability built into the strategy on paper. But if you're not meeting regularly to sense the environment, to collaborate, to put your heads together, to check on how things are, to ping the universe with those sonar pings, you're not going to adapt continuously. You're not governing the organization. You're not governing the strategy. You're just plodding along as if everything were normal. Nothing is ever normal because everything's constantly in flux. I mean, how many times do we have to see the quote, the only thing consistent is change, for someone to actually play as if that were the real thing?
Yeah, I like that. And I always believe that I always say that strategy is not an output; it's a way of being.
Yeah.
And I think what you're telling now is perfectly about that. Well, I've got the output, but then the output doesn't match the model, the orientation that person is using to navigate decisions. And that really comes to, we'll talk about the perceptual complexity, the fact that we are all beautiful individuals, but because we're individuals in a collective system, that brings a great challenge, and the fact that we perceive things very differently. So how do we externalize or make what we see explicit? Because once we can make it explicit, then we can start to see the difference between what I believe to be true and what you believe to be true, and be curious about why you're seeing what you're seeing and what does that mean to me. Yeah.
You know, I used that article with this client. And first of all, there was a lot of jealousy for your vacation in the Dolomites.
All right. Yeah. Yeah. It's a beautiful place.
Yeah. And what a place for inspiration.
Yeah.
And I had to explain to them that they should also take vacations and take inspiration from them.
Yeah.
But what they really latched on to was we don't need to agree. We just need to converge.
Yes. Yes.
Because we are never going to agree. And they are so, especially in the social sector, which is very people centered, very person first. Like in org design, the idea of designing a department around an individual is very well accepted rather than designing around a capability or a
Yeah. Yeah.
function.
Yeah.
It's like, no, we love Susie, so we're going to make a department around Susie. Why Susie? Oh no, because she's been
Yeah.
here for 30 years and we love her. What does she do? Well, you're not sure, but she can manage all these staff. Well, what do they do?
Yeah.
Nothing
Yeah.
that Susie does. So it's
Yeah.
very person centered. It's just part of who they are. But for them, the permission to not agree with each other and not have consensus on everything was a huge unlock from that article.
Mm.
The idea that we're all going to maintain our own perspectives. We just need to share them and converge on what is the mountain range around the lake that we're seeing. And yes, we're all seeing different parts of, the blind men and the elephant. We're all seeing different parts of the elephant. How do we get a whole picture of the elephant? Which doesn't have to be agreed upon, but, handshake agreed upon, but can be enough of a convergence for us to move forward.
Yes.
And that was the biggest unlock. And I can't thank you enough for that, because that has made waves with this client, that
Look,
Substack on perceptual complexity.
I'm really chuffed and glad, and and that's what I do. I love writing and sharing my thoughts so that hopefully it can help people.
Yeah, if anything, I owe you money for that.
I'll send you my bill. But that's such an important thing around the consensus bit, and I think that's where, in one of my other articles, I talked about where we need to reclaim strategy from what it was, because what we've spoke about so far is exactly what Sun Tzu talked about 300 years before Christ. It's all about movement. It's all about being very clear on your intent, but being fluid like water. To modern day, where it's almost very rigid, it's stiff. It's all about consensus, and everyone must have, everyone must be included in the strategy. And I'm like, well, they don't need to be included in the strategy, because sometimes the strategy is, it doesn't, you just carry on, do what you need to do. You're fine in this, you carry on doing what you need to do. The organization is doing this, so I need you to do this, I need you to do that. But we don't have to necessarily all agree and have to be around it. So we can have that divergence, in thoughts, but we must have that convergence in action. So when we step out and we start to direct the organization to execute, that they are converging to a common intent.
Right. And that common intent, once clear, becomes a great converging force.
Yes.
But when debated, when the common intent is debated, is where I've entered a lot of organizations.
Yes.
Or where the common law, what I'll call the North Star, is set by, let's say, the executive team or leadership or a single CEO. And everyone else goes, yeah, I'm not so sure I believe in that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what's the process to get convergence around the North Star so that we can, this is a phrase I hate, but all at least be rowing in the same direction.
Yes. Yeah.
And if you disagree, just don't put your paddle in the water, is the phrase I've heard. But don't row against the boat, but let's all try to row as if we have some path that we're taking. What I find about that is, if you use the North Star as a metaphor, as the night goes on, it changes. And then it's day and you don't have the North Star anymore. And then it's night and you have it and you can reorient. So you're constantly reorienting to that North Star.
Yeah.
And I think that's what gets lost in the governance portion.
Yes. And another part of that about that convergence is that, generally, I don't, when the direction comes from executives, if you kept it again, it coming back to that right level of the thing, I don't think many people would disagree with what you're saying. I think where the issues come is that people then start to dictate the how at too much of a lower level. That's where it comes and go, well, I don't agree. And they probably don't agree because they're the ones closer to the information. And actually they can see, and that's the whole thing around micromanagement. People feel is not so much, the fact that I am getting micromanaged. It's the frustration because you can see the options and you're not allowed to take those options when you know
Right.
it will be the best way to meet the intention.
So when we think about North Stars, or what I call goalposts, like at least setting our field of play,
Yeah.
what are the boundaries? I like to take a diagonal section of the organization all the way from the top of the house to the front line with a max mix of diversity to have that conversation with the executive in the room. But to say, look, I'm the one out there doing the work on the ground. You have your view from 30,000 feet. I have the view from literally 0 feet, sea level.
Yeah.
So how do we build that connection between your North Star and my boots on the ground reality? And that becomes then, if we can set those goalposts or those agreed upon directions from those ends of the organization, it becomes much more easy to do that mission command kind of
Yeah.
point of view where it's like, this is vetted at all levels. So now there's freedom to play at the levels based on this.
Yeah, we talk about that in the sense that I always talk about the feedback loops that exist, and what I mean by that is that when you're giving direction and the intent, you give that, but you give space for the next level down to assimilate that and feedback what they took from it. And again, that's dealing with that perceptual complexity because I can give intent all I want, but then I'm assuming that person has assimilated that the way it was meant, which is often a challenge. That's why we say we must give them space to do a couple of questions, which is, what's the situation? How does it affect us? So what's the current context we're operating in? And then what have I been told to do and why? So actually understanding what is it they're asking, what's implied, what's explicit, where are my freedoms, what can I do? And then once you've done that, you feed back and go, well, I've understood what you've asked me for, and this is what I plan to do. Or even better, I know what you're asking for, but I think we could do this, but I'm constrained by this. Can you remove that constraint? I give me an extra 100,000 or whatever the constraint is, and we can do this. Otherwise, I've got to do this. And the whole point of that is that two-way communication, that conversation, so that at each level you're happy that we're aligned. We don't have to be perfect, but we've got enough coherence that I know that you can go off and adapt and deliver the intention, but I don't have to dictate how you're doing it.
Which brings me to my least favorite word, which is cascading.
Yes, yeah. Yes.
It's
It's
right up
never
there.
cascading.
There's no
Yeah.
such thing.
No.
It's called.
Yes. And that's what it is. It's not cascading. It's not in the sense of what I've just talked about, where you're giving that freedom of action. They can
No.
adapt. That is like, you are to do this very specific thing, and here's a
It's been
load of
decided.
KPIs. Yeah,
I
it's
mean,
been decided.
it's micromanaging without someone breathing down your neck.
Yeah,
But your job's been written, everything's done, and you have no say from your perspective.
no,
And that's what I try to get my clients to do is build in that perspective from the beginning. Because if we can if we can have that person who can say, boots on the ground, this is the constraint for this goalpost. When we're making the goalposts, then the conversation around the goalpost becomes much more freeing for the organization. I really
yes,
believe in this idea of freedom within constraints.
yes,
And that's why I chose in part to work in the social sector. It it's one of the most constrained sectors. I mean, it's one of the most constrained in taxes, in funding, in all the ways they operate, and all the things they have to do, and all the compliance. It's one of the most constrained. I mean, I think healthcare would probably be the next constrained,
Yeah.
but there's more money in healthcare. At least
Yeah.
there's some flowing. So I chose the most constrained sector because I think the idea of freedom within constraints is so important to success. And
Yeah.
so let's embrace these constraints and use them as the basis of our strategy.
Yeah. And always, like I always say to people, everyone's constrained, but you must exploit your freedoms.
Right.
And yeah, and this is where in that cascading thing you were talking about is also this obsession by management by KPIs and or OKRs. But the problem with that, then it just like you were saying, that freedom to adapt, that removes the freedom to adapt, because I'm aiming for an aim rather than understanding the context and the external environment and what's changing, and then what do I need to do in response?
Right. And it completely takes away what you were talking about also, which in one of your articles, which was a safe to fail experiment.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And so if I have to meet these KPIs for this strategy, what if that strategy, the entire external environment has changed in the 6 months since that strategy is written, but I'm still trying to meet those KPIs in the same way? I can't experiment with other ways to meet those KPIs because it's too risky if I'll miss them. And then I'll lose my bonus, I'll lose my job, whatever it is. Then you have people rowing in the wrong direction because
Yeah.
the sea has changed.
Yeah, and that's the thing. They then forget to look at or to them the external environment becomes irrelevant because
Mm-hmm.
they are now just aiming for a performance construct that I
Yeah.
must hit these aims, and they construct the aims rather than to meet the higher intent.
I would argue that it's never relevant, but they ignore it.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Because they're gonna get what is that thing, isn't it? If everything's green, I'm good. You know,
Yeah.
but regardless of what's going on, because no one, you're looking. Unfortunately, in a lot of organisations, people don't get praise for keeping the organisation afloat and making sure they're not there. They get done for heroism, and that's it. They get praised for heroism, and
Mm-hmm.
heroism normally is chasing those numbers or making it look like a crisis so they can be the hero. And that's not really what we need.
No, not at all. I think we
No.
agree there.
Yeah. So what do you think definitely in your field now, because it is heavily constrained and you're balancing that organization that is also heavily constrained with some really challenging options in the external environment. I put this because someone put on a post in LinkedIn that their favorite quote was that strategy is unlimited choices with limited resources. And I hope you agree with what I'm on about in your world. There isn't unlimited choices. There's actually some very limited and often unpalatable choices with very limited resources. So,
Yes.
how do you help your clients through that?
I think it's really coming down to we have bad and bad and bad as our three options. Which
Yeah,
bad is the best bad for us?
yeah.
And
Agree.
and which one can we tolerate becomes
Mm,
the personal question. Like one of those is going to be off limits because it's morally corrupt, as you said earlier
yeah.
about people. It's like one of those is going to be morally corrupt, so we're not going to do that. Of the other two, which one can we live with? And it's
Yeah.
really about doing the best with what we have doesn't always feel positive. And I think we've come off a post-pandemic influx of funding and lots of freedoms within this sector to do a lot. And it's always been constrained. And there's always been the people who are arguing against the constraints and saying why we're constrained and why those constraints are bad. There's not a lot of conversation about what am I doing to make the best of my constraints?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
and how can I show off that I have outsized impact with limited resources. And
Yes.
that's really what I'm getting after, is that it's possible through good flexible strategy and good organization design to have outsized impact with limited resources.
Yeah, I totally agree. There's plenty of options there when you're looking at, and I suppose it comes back to this perceptual complexity. It's listening to others to understand there is a different way to do it.
Yeah.
In challenging your own, we talk about orientation, challenging your own orientation, looking for differences between what you always held to be true and what's actually happened in reality, what could do. And this notion that we have, as humans, we've got limited energy. And why waste all that energy butting heads against a constraint that won't go away when I can focus that on what is possible?
Right. Well said, Mike. And the
Mm.
final thing I'll say is that I think the sector as a whole is starting to lose its original mental model of
Yeah.
who they are, how they exist, everything from tax status to operational excellence. The mental model that has been built over, 100 years since the Great Depression or earlier, since settlement houses in this country in the 1890s. The kind of original charities here, at least in New York, were settlement houses helping new immigrants. And, every 10
Mm.
years it was a different country, but the settlement houses stayed in the neighborhoods and built those up. So from the settlement houses, the mindset of charity and doing good in the world, the mental model of that is starting to fracture.
Yeah.
And we haven't started to birth a new mental model. We haven't started to do that futuring of our own for our own selves about the mental model of our structures, processes, ways of working, but even as a sector, not just as individual organizations.
Yeah. And that's a great opportunity because within chaos becomes options,
Yep.
and again, and this is what I'm hoping that people get, especially for this conversation, is that strategy is and org design is such an important concept that should be held together, but realizing that strategy doesn't have to be, it not have to be, it's not always a nice thing. In the sense, it's not always going to be the perfect thing that we're going to be the best this, best that. Actually, sometimes strategy is you have to go down some not so great paths to be able to then reorientate to something that will work. But it takes patience and it takes a lot of sensing and understanding.
Yes. I think I'll just to add to that, I think there's an idea that strategy is the pleasant part of the work. It's the fun
Yeah,
part.
yeah, yeah,
And it's actually not. It's the tough part.
yeah. It's the the necessary toughness.
Yeah.
I think with that. Yeah, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. And I I've commented on your post actually that you're hopefully going to be joining us. Well, coming to UK in
Yes,
December-ish
in
time,
August. In August.
August. Yes.
So it might
So
overlap with some people's holidays, but I'll be in London with the Met Opera Orchestra where my wife plays in
nice. Oh yeah, because your wife's the show business, is she?
yeah, she's the clarinetist at the opera.
Oh,
So they're going to be on
nice.
tour through London, Paris, and Lucerne. So I'm going to spend some
Okay.
extra time in London.
Well,
See
I'm
see
only
you and everyone else I can.
yes, I'm only half an hour from London, so I'll
Great.
definitely make sure that we make sure we have at least a beer, if not more.
Yes.
But just before we depart, just is there anything that you would like our listeners to think about from this episode?
I think the thing I kept picking up on in our conversation was this idea of capabilities,
Mm,
that the link between strategy and the organization lies in the capabilities.
yeah,
And if you're not clear on those capabilities, you won't be clear on the organization and you won't be able to meet your strategy, even
yeah,
as it's changing and adapting. So I would think the thing to pay attention to out of this conversation really is the capabilities that lie between the organization and the strategy.
yeah. I get it. And that's such an important thing to make it actually work. Otherwise, the strategy will just be an output that sits on a wall or sits in a desk, which is not used to anyone.
Well, thank you so much, Mike.
No, thank you. It's been a pleasure. It's actually given me so much to think about now, actually, from some of the articles. I'm probably going to be busy tonight whirring away making notes for some more articles. So thank you very much for that. And for the listeners, if you like this episode as much as I've enjoyed having this conversation with Julian, please share and like, and so that your network can get as much value as we got from this conversation. So thank you very much again, Julian. I look forward to sharing this with you, and I look forward to seeing you in August in person.
Likewise. Take care.
Take care.